Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 104 of Humanity Rising. Starting on the 22nd of May, Ubiquity University and now well over 300 partnering organizations have come together to provide an open space so that people from around the world can gather on a daily basis starting at 5 p.m. Central European Time to share their experiences of the pandemic, to discuss how we can increase our strategic effectiveness, how we can implement and scale solutions that we know can solve our problems, and to ensure as best we can that the world beyond the pandemic will be more sustainable, resilient, and abundant, and healthy, and in alignment with natural systems. That's the mission of Ubiquity University, the 300 organizations. Certainly the live streaming partners, we're going out over 40 live streaming partners every day to 15 to 20,000 people. We have a great core group that attend our Zoom calls. And over the weekend, I got an email from Stan, wondering how Humanity Rising was doing and how we were transforming conversations that matter into actions that are really making a difference. So I thought I would start today with first a big, heart-filled expression of gratitude to everybody that has been supporting Humanity Rising. We have nearly 8,000 people who've registered. We've had over 550 speakers. We are growing day by day. We have the launch of Humanity Rising Netherlands last week that went off like a bang. And they're now working with the Dutch ministry in charge of COVID response to help develop a national campaign. They've been referred to already on national Dutch television. And it's been quite eventful because during the last week or two, the COVID rates have been going up. We were just all notified today that starting tomorrow morning, there's going to be enhanced discipline around social distancing. I'm in Amsterdam, where I needed to be for various university reasons. And so we're all still moving through the pandemic. But following the Dutch lead, we have Humanity Rising groups forming in Belgium, in Canada, in Chile, in Colombia, in the UK, in the United States, in Australia. So Humanity Rising is getting out there as people like you are just saying, this is the kind of conversation everybody needs to be in. We're going through an amazingly challenging time. And the pandemic that many people thought would just take a few months is now extending into the fall and possibly through the winter. Some countries, like the United States, it's still spinning out of control. And so local groups allowing local populations in the local language to come together is a very important initiative. One of our partners in Bogota, Colombia, has been translating every single Humanity Rising session since May 22nd into Spanish. And we've uploaded it now onto our Ubiverse. We've got distribution partners coming out of Humanity Rising so that the Spanish summaries of our sessions every day are just going out there into the Spanish-speaking world. Ubiquity has got an amazing partnership with the University of International Cooperation in Costa Rica with Ed Muller, who you all know convened the program on donut and regenerative economics in July. He's going to be convening another panel the week of October 13th on biomimicry and and regenerating our economies in alignment with natural systems. And we're now building a major coalition of over a dozen groups that want to come together to develop courses, programs, degrees in donut regenerative economics, so that the world can begin to study these things as an academic matter. Finally, as I mentioned earlier, we're live streaming. And if any of you out there want to just be in touch with us, the most important thing any of us can do is spread the word. And the conversations that we're convening every day, Monday through Friday, are conversations of gravity. They're conversations of relevance. They're conversations, the purpose of which is to catalyze actions that can change the world at a moment when scientists are telling us we're quite literally running out of time. So I have to say, on behalf of the entire Ubiquity team and the multiple partners, we're just coming into closure today and tomorrow of the Caravan of Unity and World Unity and the Peace Weekend and United Forever, all hundreds and hundreds of groups from all over the world came together to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations and how we can work more effectively to instill world peace. So we're grateful. I've never felt so optimistic. It's important, everyone, with all the news about how bad it is, to be, in a sense, inoculating ourselves each and every day with the vaccine of human goodness. That's what's going to see us through. That's why we ultimately are here, so that at this critical moment, we can come together in such a way that goodness prevails, harmony with the earth is reinstated, and we have the distinction of being that generation at this critical moment when humanity's sojourn on this earth is on the precipice, that we saved the day. And we began the process of creating a world of abundant, sustainable harmony with the earth that will endure to our children under the 7th generation. So thank you, everyone, for all that you're doing. We appreciate it, and we're going to do everything we can to support all of you moving forward. And now I'd like to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Sabina van Gafka, who will commence our program.
Thank you so much, Jim, and a warm welcome to all of our viewers once again who are joining us maybe for the first time, or who are dedicated to joining us every day as we broadcast Humanity Rising every day, Monday to Friday, between 5 and 6:30 Central European Time. And thank you, Jim, also for laying that foundation. And I'd like to join in on echoing what you also said. You know, we've had 10 days of international peace activities with the United Forever Facing Our Future initiative among many. And they've all done such incredible work and co-creational work around initiatives of peace and raising awareness and inspired action around that around the globe. And it sort of also shows what a delicate balance we have at the moment, or at the moment we've had it for a long time, but that it's sort of really coming into transparency, the way the world is looking. One end, we have initiatives for peace and a just, regenerative, sustainable world and humanity. And on the other hand, we're bombarded, of course, lately now coming up towards November 3rd with articles and headlines, the elections that could break America and everything that that entails. And it shows such an urgency to both to raise awareness, but to also really educate ourselves, especially in this chaos that is being stirred up with what looks to be a dysfunctional, let's put it that, fraudulent even election cycle currently led by President Trump, and that is shaping the current constitutional crisis. And that may also cause a reaction of constitutional crisis, which is also why this affects all of us around the world. And also sort of taking in the fact, the consideration, having read the news, that President Trump, whether he wins or loses, it's obvious he will not concede and that he will not accept a peaceful transition of power if that may become the outcome. And just diving into that is quite a profound and chaotic and ununderstandable position of a president to take. And that is what we're going to be also talking about. But I also want to add, that's why it's so important with platforms like Humanity Rising and all others who are aligning and opening and holding space for conversations, for a multitude of perspectives and mindsets, and also, of course, the actions that can be taken. And today also talking about the current constitutional crisis, the need for systemic change, and how can we also arise a new political system, a next generation of political system. And it's actually Jim Garrison, who is president of Ubiquity University, that all of you know by now, who has dedicated 104 days to Humanity Rising each day. He will be convening on this important matter, along with Shelley Acorn, who is COO of Ubiquity University, talking about Donald Trump and the upcoming US election. Before we throw us into this field of conversation, as we always do, let's align ourselves in the heart coherence meditation of 1 minute. And this is specifically also important, of course, to align ourselves to the present. So we're more open to different perspectives and also in the present to the conversation, but also because coherence is really what we need today. It is so important for us to have coherence so that we are also receptible for looking into our own truths and for also trying to navigate amidst this turmoil of times and fake news and everything that is going on, and to really be open-hearted and open-minded in a space that we are convening in today. So Richard, if you'd like to play the music, let's take a few inhales and exhales and just center ourselves here and now. Thank you so much for taking the time to have that 1 minute of meditation and just aligning us here and now. And before I hand over the word to Jim, I found a quote from Abraham Lincoln, as we're going to talk about a president of 2020, can also remind us of one who were many centuries ago, who said, "Nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power." So with that, I hand it over to Jim Garrison and Shelley Acorn.
Thank you, Sabina. That is a very timely and appropriate quote from Abraham Lincoln, who knew about human frailties and human power. So thank you for that. And thank you, everyone. This is the first time since Humanity Rising began that I have taken the podium, as it were, with my good friend and colleague, Shelley Alcorn, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Ubiquity University. And let me begin by just saying a word about Ubiquity. We're not an ordinary university. We're accredited like every university of standing in the world. We provide BA, MA, PhD degrees. We have courses that are contributing to empowering young people to navigate through a world of hypercomplexity. But more than that, and fundamental to this session today, is the fact that we believe that universities need to take stands on matters that they believe to be important. This is a pretty radical departure from most universities. As you know, most of the universities out there don't take stands on much of anything. They disseminate knowledge in an apolitical, kind of amoral way. Spirituality is considered a private matter. But we take the position at Ubiquity University, the board, the management, the students in our community, that in a time of critical duress, when the fate of the earth is at stake, it is essential that all of us make stands on those matters that we believe to be important, like climate change. Ubiquity's taken a position that climate change is important. We took a position when Malala, if you remember her, the Pakistani girl, was shot in the head because she was just simply trying to develop girls' education in Pakistan. We took a stand on that. We took a stand after the shootings in Florida when those beautiful high school kids stood up and challenged the nation around gun control. We took a stand in support of those high school students. And now today we're taking a stand on the upcoming election on November 3rd in the United States and the presidency of Donald Trump. Because we believe that this election may be crucial not only for the United States, but for the entire world. If Donald Trump is able to take the election again, I'm careful not to say win it. He stole it in 2016, as you all know, with the help of the Russians and the manipulation of the electoral process. And in recent days, he's been making very clear statements, as Sabinia just indicated, that whatever happens, he's not going to relinquish the presidency because he doesn't believe that the election will be fair. And this has caused consternation. And so today we just want to enter into this realm. And I would like to begin to make some contextual remarks, and I want to turn it over to Shelley, who is deeply immersed in the literature and in the details of what's happening day by day in the United States. By saying, I think the best way to enter into the catastrophic nature of the Trump presidency and why his threats about the upcoming election need to be taken absolutely seriously is just to briefly summarize his response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is not an accident that the United States, only 4% of the human population, has well over 20% of all the cases and all the deaths. And yesterday, there was a new national average hit with 55,000 more cases reported in a 24-hour period. When the pandemic first broke, if you remember, Trump derided it as fake news, a conspiracy of the Democrats and other malevolent interests in the United States to tarnish his presidency. When the pandemic took hold and people started to die, he prevaricated and then began to engage in all kinds of wild theories about how you could cure it through drinking bleach or taking certain medications, but all the while mocking the use of masks, challenging the scientific expertise. Dr. Fauci, among others, from the Center for Disease Control, and began to foment through the Republican Party, through his fanatically loyal followers that constitute, tragically, about 35% of the US population, to get them to challenge states and cities that were trying to deal with the pandemic, trying to enact social distancing legislation, the use of masks, so that finally there were pitched battles in the streets. There was litigation. Churches said that it was unconstitutional and a violation of religious liberties to have to wear masks in church or not to congregate above a certain number. So while countries around the world were dealing with the pandemic, accepting the science, doing that which was rational, Donald Trump and the Republican Party refused. And guess what? 4% of the human population now has over 20% of all the cases and all the deaths. And the cases are continuing to rise. It was reported last Friday that over 20 states are setting record numbers. And most of them are in the Midwest, governed by Republicans who've basically blown off any safety procedures around the pandemic. There's cases now, evidence that is beginning to surface around the meatpacking plants, where thousands of cases were spawned, and how the Trump administration demanded that the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, modify its language and basically leave anything that the meatpacking companies wanted to do as within their complete discretion. The reason why I raise this is because the mentality that Trump has manifested with regards to something as obvious as a pandemic is the same mentality with regards to the US Constitution and the democratic processes and governance. Since he walked into the Oval Office, and in fact, for the duration of his campaign leading to the White House, he's been divisive. He's fomented hate, fear, anxiety, racism, sexism, xenophobia at every turn. It's not surprising that in the midst of the intensity of the pandemic, what bursts out through the death of George Floyd. But the wound, the open wound that's been festering, that Trump has been poking at with regards to racism in America. And now we're coming up to the election. And he's been mounting a campaign for months, saying that there's no way that the election can be fair, that the voting is rigged, that the voting system is corrupted, that the write-in ballots are different than the mail-in ballots, and he's ordered the post office, the United States Postal Service, at a moment when, because of the pandemic, people need their prescription drugs delivered on time, and we're coming up to election, which because of the pandemic is going to see massive voter mail-in ballots to deliberately strip away from the post office the sorting machines, the counting machines, ripping up mailboxes from street corners so people can't make the Postal Service do what it has done since its beginning, and that is to deliver the mail in a timely fashion. All the while, if you just take it out 1 degree, 10 degrees, you have the manipulation of the Trump administration by Vladimir Putin. It's been an extraordinary thing that the President of the United States, for all practical purposes, has been serving as an asset of the Kremlin in the Oval Office. You can't make this stuff up. But Donald Trump has been obsequious to Vladimir Putin for reasons we still don't know, whether it's blackmail or simply his adulation of another authoritarian leader. But Vladimir Putin is very clear about what he intends to do with the United States, and that is to weaken the United States, to weaken our partnerships in Europe through the NATO alliance, the European Union, the major international organizations that have been the foundations of the international order. And Trump has gone lockstep with everything that Vladimir Putin has directed, such that now what's coming out of the White House, what's coming out of the Republican Party through official channels is basically Russian military intelligence disinformation. And you all know what the Russians are doing with Facebook and Google and all the social media, Twitter, essentially unimpeded because the Trump administration has made it impossible to take any remedial steps to secure election and democratic safety. So we have come today, about 6 weeks before the election, and we want to just talk about it. We want to encourage people to indicate points of view or questions in the chats, because the election that we are now approaching will determine the fate of the United States and quite possibly the fate of the earth. Because if Trump wins, the American Republic is finished. And if the lights of democracy go out in America, how long will they endure in the rest of the world? So with those brief introductory remarks, I want to turn it over to Shelley Alcorn my good friend and colleague with whom Shelley and I talk every single day. We manage the workings of the University of Humanity Rising. And I just want to say a word about Shelley. She's one of the most extraordinary people I've ever had the pleasure of knowing and working with. Her integrity of spirit, her capacity for competent, fair administration of organizational rules and procedures is an inspiration to all of us at Ubiquity. So it's an honor, Shelley, to have you join me today in taking a stand on the US election coming up.
Well, thank you very much for having me. So this is going to be a discussion from a historical perspective, an explanatory perspective, and then a what could potentially happen next perspective. And I think it is important for us to realize that what we are doing today is telling you things that we know and things that we believe will help you put this into context, particularly for those of you who live outside of the United States and have been baffled by what you're seeing. Many of our international friends and students tell us constantly, how did America get here? What, you're a democracy. What in the world is going on? So we're going to talk about some of the procedural things that you may not know about American democracy, sort of the roots of how I became aware and really have worked on these issues for a long time. And then the serious moment that we're in. It cannot be overstated that we are in a moment that I never thought I would see in America. And none of us did, and yet it is here. So let me tell you a little story of how I got here myself, how I became very interested in these topics and have done much research over the years about this. Back in 1997, I had the honor of being selected as dramaturg or literary manager of a play that was being held at my college under the brilliant director, Melanie Smith. And the play was called Good, and it is by C.P. Taylor. And the basic story of Good follows just sort of a middle rank academic professor in the 1930s, and then tells a story of how through small steps, small compromises, small decisions that seemed inconsequential at the time, lead him further and further and further into the SS in Germany. And so our central question around the play was, how does this happen? How do these dynamics happen where normal people who, if presented with a question, what would you do, certainly say, I would never do that. But then how are they co-opted into the system as it happens? We had a huge sort of project built around this particular play. We obtained funding, grant funding, to take the entire cast and crew to the Holocaust Museum in Los Angeles. We held community workshops with camp survivors and with camp liberators. We were able to take the play into high schools in our area. And as part of that sort of enormous project, what became really clear to all of us is that there was nothing particularly special about what happened in World War II and what happens in other fascist dictatorships and authoritarian regimes. These things follow a process, and it can happen anywhere. Lo and behold, it's happening here. So let's talk a little bit about that. Now, there is a danger whenever we begin to discuss fascism in the 1930s, whether we're talking about Mussolini or Hitler or anything else. There's a reaction inside of us that says, "Well, we can't talk about that. We can't compare anything to what's happened before." And I'm going to ask people to let that initial impulse go, because nothing is exactly the same. Nothing plays out exactly the same. Context is always different, but there are lessons that we can learn from not only the 1930s, but other many examples in Latin America and other places around the world where authoritarianism has taken hold. So one of the reasons why we talk a lot about the 1930s is simply because the Germans were meticulous note takers. And we ended up with many more original sources of material in that space that were recovered post-war than we have had in other regimes. So it is a really detailed example of how these things happen. So as part of that research, we also did a lot of studying into hate groups and neo-Nazi groups in the United States. Now remember, this is back in the late 90s. And I was shocked at the number of neo-Nazi groups that were functional inside the United States in the late 1970s, or the late 1990s. That was surprising and distressing. And currently, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, we have 1,600 extremist groups working in the United States and 940 hate groups that are defined as hate groups in the United States. You never arrive somewhere without having been somewhere else. So these things that are happening in the United States that feel like an emergency today on September 28th have been an emergency for a while and did not come out of nowhere. There have been a number of things that have happened in the United States over the past 20 years that have created the situation that we're in today. And many scholars will point to 9/11 as our Reichstag fire. That our Reichstag fire actually happened in 9/11. And in the aftermath of that, the establishment of the Patriot Act and the Department of Homeland Security in the United States. Surveillance of individuals, highly militarized police force, and other forces that are controlled by the Department of Homeland Security that are not the military. Second, we have the Citizens United ruling. In the Citizens United ruling, the Supreme Court ruled that unlimited money can go into politics. And if you're interested at all in reading the dissent, I believe it was Justice Stevens wrote an 84-page dissent for Citizens United. And it is interesting reading for those of you who are wondering what impact Citizens United had on the political system since that decision was made. We also had a Supreme Court decision that overturned the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act was established to help our people of color, our brothers and sisters, have fair and free elections. And the Supreme Court decided all of a sudden that, oh, we don't really need that anymore. That's not a problem in the United States. There's nothing institutional about this in terms of that. And that brings us to 2016. And I'm already seeing the chat, and I expected this, but I'd like you to hear me out. Let's think about what's happening here in the United States and think critically about it. I am not here to denigrate. I'm not here to attack. I'm not here to do anything other than explain, from my perspective, what we're learning and have learned from past and current and potential future activities. So this is an intellectual discussion. Let's go ahead and keep it that way. Appreciate it. So we talk a lot at Ubiquity about this idea of hypercomplexity and how hypercomplexity in many areas, economics, climate change, social change, globalization, all of the complexity that we're surrounded by, the hyper complexity that we're surrounded by, can lead to a desire to simplify, a desire to go back to an imagined past that never really existed, to be attracted to sound bites and quick solutions. As I believe it was Timothy Snyder said, a punch in the mouth is a lot less ambiguous than diplomacy and negotiation. And so there is a tendency in these types of hyper-complex situations to try to default to this imaginary past, to try to simplify that this will just, if we just make America great again, everything will be fine. And that's just our own anxiety about hypercomplexity and things we don't understand playing out in a political arena. In 2016, I believed that Trump could be elected in the United States. And I was in the minority of my friends, and I understand that. But looking at his message, looking at the way he was behaving, looking at the way he was comporting himself, looking at the way the establishment seemed absolutely incapable of dealing with him, I realized that it was possible that he could win the presidency, and he did. The day after, or shortly thereafter, Masha Gessen, who was one of my heroes and who I follow very carefully and have followed, she is a journalist who was in Russia during the time of Putin's ascent. She's a wonderful writer. She has a way of explaining things to make things understandable. She wrote an essay published on the New Yorker and that basically blew up their server on surviving autocracy. It was a piece called Autocracy Rules for Survival. And I'm going to go ahead and look at these rules and then explain a little bit about how in 4 years, these rules have become more and more important to us in the United States. Rule number 1, according to Masha Gessen, was believe the autocrat. Believe the autocrat. Believe it when they say they're going to do this, that, or the other thing. There is a tendency inside the United States to dismiss what people say. Oh, he's just joking. Oh, that's impossible. Oh, they'll never let him do that. Oh, we've been here for 200 and something years in this democracy. It'll never happen. That is faulty thinking. That is rationalization. That is not actually listening to what Trump has said and how Trump is behaving. In the 2016 election, he had already said that if he didn't win, he would believe that the election had been rigged against him. This rigging idea started before he was even elected as president. And everyone at the time was, oh, that'll never happen. Fast forward, and he is saying it repeatedly now. He's broadcasting everything he's going to do. And the reason why autocrats broadcast what they're going to do is they want to normalize it. They're preparing the groundwork and they're normalizing what they're hearing. There's a tendency on the part of the American people to believe if it's done in the open, it must not be wrong. Maybe that's globally, but that happens to be in the United States. If they say it, somehow it's okay. If it's not hidden, somehow there must be some truth to it. And so believing the autocrat is crucial, and believing what he said last week, that he is not going to commit to a peaceful transfer of power, is incredibly alarming. We need to take him at his word. Rule number 2, do not be taken in by small signs of normality. I think we all remember during his first State of the Union, after all of this stuff was happening, it's just this crazy stuff. was going on. And at that State of the Union address, the media afterwards said, well, tonight he became presidential. That's just grasping for small signs of normality. That's just grasping for, surely this isn't as bad as we think it is. Surely not. And that is problematic. David Wallace Wells, I don't know if any of you have read his book, The Uninhabitable Earth, but I highly recommend it, about climate change. He also blogs on Medium. And he was talking about how Americans tend to think that someone will come out and say, you are now a fascist country. Like there's going to be some clear demarcation between what was and what is now. And that's not necessarily how this is playing out. We're going about our daily lives leading up to November 3rd, taking our kids to the dentist, petting the dog, going to the grocery store. We're doing all of these normal things in the middle of this crucial moment. And I think we're waiting for it to hit. And it's been hitting for 4 years, and we have been just sort of letting it go. Oh, surely they won't go that far. Oh, we can control him. Oh, blah, 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 blah. So don't be taken in by small signs of normality. You are in an abnormal situation in the United States. As normal as your life looks, as normal as your Facebook feed looks, as normal as things appear, no, this is not a normal moment in the United States. Don't fall for that. Rule number 3, institutions will not save you. And she couldn't have been more right about that. Institutions cannot save you. We have watched as institution after institution from the Department of Justice and Department of Homeland Security and the Secretary of State, et cetera, has been taken over by people who want to, in many cases, actively destroy the institutions that they're working for. And they're actively assisting or passively not engaging in efforts that would actually allow us to combat this effectively, most effectively. Institutions will not save us. Institutions are not going to save us. The Department of Justice over the last 2 weeks has named 3 cities in the United States, New York, Seattle, and Portland, as anarchist jurisdictions. Number 1, that's not really a thing. That doesn't matter. Number 2, this is again normalizing what's next. Putting this idea in people's minds that there's anarchy in the US. There's not anarchy today. There might be a little bit coming soon, but institutions will not save you. Rule number 5, don't compromise. Rule number 6, remember the future. We were asked 4 years ago by Timothy Snyder and Masha Gessen and other scholars to write down the line that we would not cross. And then don't cross it. And yet we're here. So, talking about the moment that we're in right now and sort of where is that signal? Right? Where is that signal where it's suddenly going to dawn on everybody where we are? We have challenges in the United States with language, and language needs to be precise. It needs to be something that we can use. The decimation of the public sphere in the United States over the past 4 years, I would say maybe the last 20 years, last 30 years, has been this co-option of language where words just don't mean what they mean. Words are put into contexts that are not at all accurate. And in the United States, one thing that Umair Haque tells us repeatedly, Timothy Snyder tells us repeatedly in his book on tyranny, is the importance of language to be able to discuss what's happening in the United States. We have been loath to refer to what is happening in the United States as fascism. Mostly because when someone says the word fascism, someone says, you're being dramatic, you're talking about Hitler. And they don't understand that fascism is just actually a thing. It's a definition that can apply in different contexts, but that is indeed what we are dealing with right now, is fascism. Masha Gessen has also wrote a book. It's not really showing up very well here. I am developing a list of resources for you, Surviving Autocracy. She just published it recently. And she said that part of the issue in the United States and why we are falling into this autocratic fascist nightmare is because of the fact that we don't have a language of fascism in the United States. All we have is democracy. And until we have the language to describe what's happening, it's hard for us to see it. And she refers to the work of the Hungarian sociologist Bálint Magyar, who has come up with a way to describe fascistic and authoritarian sort of takeovers in different stages. The first stage is the autocratic attempt. The autocratic attempt is what we've been living through for the past 4 years. That is stage one, autocratic attempt. In the weeks after his inauguration, climate change information was taken off of websites. Diversity information was taken off of websites. Science started disappearing. Spanish language started disappearing from our government websites. There has been an attempt from day one to marginalize and take as much space as possible up. Stage two is the autocratic breakthrough, and that's where we are right now. The concern is that the autocratic breakthrough is here within the next 6 weeks. Autocratic breakthrough is rapidly followed by autocratic consolidation. And that will be what will happen after the breakthrough, necessarily. And when you begin to see this and define it in language that you can refer to as an attempt, as a breakthrough, as consolidation, it gives you a better idea of the timeline that Americans are on, that the United States of America is on. We have been in an autocratic attempt. And again, I would say that it is not just the past 4 years, because Republicans in Congress and other forces have been making decisions such as denying Obama the opportunity to put Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court. These no's, this scorched earth, this we will not give an inch, is endemic to creating the polarization that we're in now. So, if language is important, then let's talk about some of the things that are important and from a language perspective have upset the United States greatly, but that are true. The camps that have been established down on the border between the United States and Mexico are concentration camps, not in the way necessarily that you would think of when we say that word and associate that with 1930s Germany. A camp where people are concentrated is a concentration camp. This is not the first time we have done this. We interned Japanese Americans in World War II. We have done this with Native peoples and Indigenous peoples throughout our history. This is not a new phenomenon here in the United States. It has taken on a particularly horrifying situation where children have been intentionally taken from their parents. We have reports now of forced sterilization against women who are being held in the camps because of our inability to hold more than one idea at a time. That news report came out and then just disappeared. These things disappear. There is a pattern to this, that this continued assault on the senses of outrageous things that shouldn't be happening blind you to all of the things that are actually happening. So we need to keep our eye on the ball. Trump Jr. just went on Twitter and called for all able-bodied men and women to show up to monitor the polls. Able-bodied. Language is important. Able-bodied is a subtle threat. And for the first time in 40 years, the Republican National Committee has not been required to file with the courts their plan for poll monitoring in the United States. They were required to do that because of patterns of intimidation, patterns of hostility that were done in the past 40 years. Suddenly this year, they don't need to file a plan. Now they can do what they want. And we saw Trump supporters blocking poll places in Virginia 2 weeks ago. And we expect that to continue. Language is important. So let's talk about the mechanism for a minute. What is the mechanism that has got us here? Because when people think American democracy, they think of a mature democracy. What in the world is happening here? And what in the world is happening here is the fact that we don't have it's not a democracy as in one person, one vote. We are in a republic. So we have representational democracy. And as part of that representational democracy, the popular vote doesn't actually elect the president. Traditionally, what has happened is electors are named to the Electoral College, and the electors who actually vote for the president cast their votes in accordance with how their state voted. There are certain states in the union who require by law that the electors must vote for the candidate that the state voted for, but that is not necessarily true. They can vote how they will vote. There's nothing in the Constitution that stops them. Most of our democratic traditions are not laws in the United States. Most of our democratic traditions are simply norms, political norms that we've all agreed to, that this is the way things go, this is the way things should happen. When you're dealing with a lawless president, a norm-breaking president, those norms don't mean a thing. The norms don't mean a thing. And we don't have the legal infrastructure behind us to make it a thing as of now. So the Trump campaign has basically broadcasted how they plan to subvert the November 3rd election. Mostly because bullies who are confident want to normalize things and they almost dare you to do something about it. Here's your pencil case. Here's your pencil case. You can't have your pencil case. So there are 5 interlocking elements. The Trump campaign, this is based on reporting in the Atlantic, not a theory, not a guess, this is reporting. The Trump campaign has been reaching out to Republican-controlled legislatures and governors to propose that in the case that they are able to declare their election non-binding or fraudulent in some way, that the legislatures in those states, key states that we need for the Electoral College, will simply pledge their electors to Trump, thereby circumventing the will of the people completely. There are 5 interlocking elements. And because George W. Bush didn't win the popular vote, the Supreme Court put him in. Trump didn't win the popular vote. The Electoral College put him in. So the people have been disenfranchised for years when it comes to the Electoral College. We know it's a problem. A lot of people outside of the United States don't understand what the Electoral College is. It is a legacy institution. Don't want to have too many people of too many different colors voting for things, do you? So there are 5 interlocking elements of this strategy, and they're very clear, and they're in front of us right now. One is delegitimize the votes. President's doing that on a daily basis. Bill Barr at the Department of Justice is doing that on a daily basis. Delegitimize the vote. That's very important. That's number 1. And remember, they've been doing it for 4 years. This message is not new. So this isn't shocking to anyone. They were saying it in 2015 in the lead up to 2016. So this is not shocking to folks. 2, refuse to accede to a peaceful transfer of power. And he flat out said it. He's flat out done it, flat out said it. He is not going to accede to a peaceful transfer of power. 3, mount legal challenges. The Trump campaign has sent thousands of lawyers to local jurisdictions to file lawsuits, which is his favorite tool, which is something that he's used successfully in his career to stymie things and get his way and delay. This is a delay tactic to challenge the vote count. There's been a bill introduced in the Senate or the House, I forget which, to declare that the vote at the end of the night on November 3rd is the vote. When, because of the pandemic and other factors in the United States, we are not going to know the outcome of the election on November 3rd. But there's a push to say that only the votes counted on November 3rd will count. And there is a reason for that. Because traditionally, voters in person, who, by the way, don't believe COVID-19 is real, tend to skew Republican. There's a phenomenon called democratic shift, where folks who vote absentee or vote by mail, which is also not a new thing. Voting by mail is not new. This is not new. There's democratic shift, where later votes tend to be more democratic. So there will be an attempt to declare that the election is over on November 3rd, because that's what Americans are used to. This is why the United States Postal Service is being co-opted and why they're taking out voting machines and sorting machines. A court recently demanded that DeJoy replace those machines, and we thought, ooh, a victory in the courts. For a moment or two, until now DeJoy says, well, we can't put them back because we've stripped them for parts. So apparently they dismantled them, stripped them for parts, and took off. So in defiance of a court order, DeJoy isn't putting those machines back. So delegitimize the vote, refuse to accede to a peaceful transfer of power, insist that the vote on November 3rd is the vote, no matter which way it goes. 4, arm twist electors, arm twist those Republican legislatures to declare that those votes are invalid and put their own electors in the Electoral College. And last but not least, the Supreme Court to decide the election. The passing of RBG led to a paroxysm of grief that would have been understandable under any circumstance, because she was a trailblazer. She was an amazing woman. She did so much for women's rights and for people of color and for fairness and for justice. Losing her immediately in front of this election. Believe the autocrat. Trump has said, I need 9 justices on the court to decide the election when it gets to them. Believe the autocrat. This is not happening behind closed doors. This is happening right in front of us. And we've already experienced a Supreme Court making that kind of decision. So there's precedent inside the United States to say, well, you know, that was okay. You know, they kind of had to decide it. No. Past is often prologue. It's happened before. They're planning on it happening again. So, that is where we're at. This didn't come out of nowhere. This isn't different from attempts that have been made before in many other countries. It is here in the United States. And there are 3 major dangers that we have in front of us right now. That, again, I'm going to try and use some language here. We all know the consequences of climate change. 4 more years of Trump, 8 more years of Trump, 10 more years of Trump, however long he's going to extend this, because he continues to talk about needing a 3rd term, which, by the way, is only an amendment in the Constitution. Climate change is crucial. Our global friends need to pay close attention to what the United States does between November 3rd and January 20th. There's a lame duck session. There's every incentive for us to do something dramatic in order to throw a monkey wrench in, to just say, let him keep being president. We have to be aware of that. And we also need to wrap our heads around the fact that 1/3 of the United States population believes that there will be a civil war break out in the United States within the next 5 years. Whether people being dramatic, whether that's true, whether that's not, the survey, I think it's important for us to pay attention to that, particularly because of the way Trump supporters are being co-opted beyond political sensibility into an almost religious fervor. They're radicalizing their voters. And they're doing it through conspiracy thinking. We have more guns than we have humans in the United States. And even if 10% of the most ardent supporters who believe that they are fighting on behalf of God, who believe they're fighting on behalf of children, who believe they're fighting on behalf of something, they're being radicalized. 10% of those 940 hate groups take to the streets in the United States. It's 50 times more Bolsheviks who stormed the Winter Palace. It's double the number of soldiers who served in the Confederate Army. Obviously, population control and percentages play into that, but it's that kind of languaging that we need to be aware of, that we need to counter, and we need to take effective action against. So, how can we help? Vote. You must vote. You must vote early if you can. We will need to take to the streets en masse if the worst comes to pass, because that is almost the only thing that has ever changed this kind of situation, is people in the streets. Number 3, inform yourselves. Read materials. Consider the impossible. One of the things that Timothy Snyder says repeatedly is Americans, and Masha Gessen also says, Americans have a lack of imagination. They have a lack of imagination that something bad could happen here. They can't consider a potential outcome that flies in the face of the belief system and the value system that they grew up with, or that they think is still intact. The authoritarian attempt is well underway because a lot of our cabinet secretaries have been acting like it's already an authoritarian state. With all of these press conferences we see of cabinet members effusively lavishing praise on Trump, doing what he says, acting on his behalf. The attempt is underway. And a lot of people already believe that it should continue. November 3rd, the month of November, the period of time that we are entering will be crucial into determining whether or not it succeeds. We love you. We thank you for being here. We're not leaving yet. I just want to say that you are thinking, that you are feeling, that you are supporting us. And we just appreciate the fact that we have this platform to talk openly about these issues. And I hope we continue to have it. So, thanks.
Whew. Shelley, that was a masterpiece of laying out the details of what's going on within the context of everything we know about the nature and rise of authoritarian systems. So in the first instance, I just want to thank you for a presentation that I think should be sent out very far and very wide. So thank you for that. I'd like to ask you two interrelated questions having to do with what can be done. It's one thing for the voters to get out and vote, knowing that there's a whole apparatus afoot to stop the vote. I would just give one quick example. Senator Rick Scott, an ardent Trump supporter in the US Senate, proposed legislation last week entitled Help America Vote Act. And it was basically to stop counting all mail-in ballots within 48 hours of the election. So here you have many of the ingredients that you're talking about. You have a curtailing of the democratic process, but you call it Help America Vote Act. So in classic Orwellian fashion, you use language to turn reality upside down. Now, in the face of this, and this is where the question is, in addition to what we can do as voters, citizens, ordinary people casting our ballots as we virtually all do, I'm sure, on this call. In addition to that, to stop an authoritarian leader, you need either some countervailing force among the governing elites in the Democratic Party, Wall Street, or the military. Now, as you're understanding the complexities of what's shaping up, do you see the rise of authoritarianism as it's being choreographed by Trump and the Republicans to be countering any institutional resistance? Or is that another deep danger in the overall equation? And I ask this because that's what happened in the rise of the Nazis in the Weimar Republic in the 1920s and the 1930s. As it turned out, the Nazis were able to rise because in the end, neither the progressive forces or the military either they didn't understand the gravity of what was going on. They couldn't get it together, but nothing materialized that could counter the inexorable rise of the Nazis into power. So how do you see that equation playing out right now in the US situation?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. So it may seem like, oh my gosh, well, we just need to get out and vote, right? We just need to get out and vote. And let's remember, he lost popular vote. Voting isn't going to be enough. We need to get on the phone to our elected representatives and pressure them right now to start using the right language. I am not seeing, similarly to what we saw in 1930s Germany, when you look at politicians' statements and whatnot and so on, I am not seeing a full-throated denunciation of what is happening, nor an effective naming of what is happening on behalf of most of the opposition leaders. They seem to be taking this, we're the adults in the room, we have remedies, it's not going to get that bad. They are taking a very passive approach by not calling authoritarianism, by not calling it what it's called. And they're not doing it in a comprehensive way. They may release a statement, oh, that's awful, what happened at the post office, but they're doing it in context of fundraising emails, right? It's like, that is not helpful. We have a distinct inability for people to understand that they need to say something, that we're not in a fight of ideas or ideals or what the future looks like, other than it's going to be a fascist authoritarianism or it's going to be a democracy. The election on November 3rd isn't going to fix what's wrong. It'll go a long way to being able to put those fixes in place. Now, as to the military, I am not comforted by the fact that the military continues to say in their statements, we will have no role in the peaceful transition of power. Because that's very fuzzy language. Democrats interpret that as, oh, good, they won't let him stay. And the Republican side, and I'm just going to call it fascist, and I don't even know. Democrat and Republican is such a it's language that just we say it so automatically, but we don't even know what it means half the time. Pro-Trump, do not Republicans, pro-Trump people take that as the military is not going to intervene. So that gives them more confidence to do what they did in Lafayette Square. What's been happening in Portland and Seattle and Kenosha and Washington, D.C. are dress rehearsals for how to deploy armed, unbadged, ununiformed troops in the streets. They're coming from CBP, Customs and Border Protection, which every sociologist knows that people who guard borders tend to think in terms of black and white. They tend to think in terms of absolutism and absolute control. It is not a mistake that where they're getting these troops, these ununiformed troops, is through Department of Homeland Security mechanisms, not the military. And they're co-opting certain branches of the National Guard as well. So we need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of that. And we need to talk to our elected representatives. We need to talk to everyone we know. We need to make sure that if worse comes to worse, that enough people get in the streets. There's been too much of the other here in the United States, and it works in every authoritarian regime we've ever had. The other. That's happening to the other. That's the other. That's not me. That's the other. I'm okay. That's the other. We have to get rid of otherism in our minds and in our language. So please go out and vote. Please get in the streets if you need to. Please increase political pressure on people who are running for office right now to start calling it what it is, and for them to put up a full-throated defense of the democracy that we are attempting to maintain in the United States. And do not be comforted by the fact that the military seems to be taking a hands-off position, because the troops that dispersed the protesters in Lafayette Square were under Department of Justice control. They were under Bill Barr. They were not under the Pentagon. The Pentagon sent troops and then kind of got upset and wishy-washy about it and pulled them back. So just be aware of that. I think those are dynamics that we need to be cognizant of. I don't know if I answered the question or not. I hope it helped.
Yeah, and that just brings me to the other question I wanted to ask as we draw this to a close, and that is sort of the relationship with all the protests that is currently taking place. You know, in the aftermath of George Floyd, I think they said there was protests going on in over 400 cities in the United States. If you take Louisville, Kentucky, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington, just to name a few, there have been protests going on every day, every night for 3 to 4 months.
Yeah.
And so there is in the United States sort of the rise of authoritarianism in the Trump administration, but then the seething cauldron of protests, activism, Black Lives Matter, you know, anti-racism, and increasingly now around the election. How do you view this, Shelley, looking at the situation from the ground up? You know, if you were there outside the Civic Center in Portland, Oregon, say, or in Louisville, Kentucky, around a protest with Breonna Taylor, is there a way that could reach a higher critical mass and make some kind of a difference? Is it totally disconnected? How do you view that?
Oh, it's not disconnected at all. The protests that have been happening in light of George Floyd are, number one, again, 200 years in the making, 400 years in the making. This is not a situation that happened last night. But these are reactions to, it was a reaction to sort of this institutional systemic racism we have in the United States, but it is also a recognition, I think an unconscious recognition of what we are all about to lose. What we are all about to lose.
Good point.
And the reason for that is because of the tape of George Floyd. Because that officer was videotaped for minutes. And you could tell that he knew there would be no consequences for this. And as we've seen the protests erupt, we've seen the training ground. We've seen the president, you need to dominate the battle sphere. We've seen the militarized people in cars just disappearing people off the streets. This is suddenly contributing to this acknowledgement. If that person feels so absolved of responsibility while he's killing someone right in front of us, how widespread is that? And in the face of the political turmoil, suddenly we're understanding, oh, it's far more widespread than we had thought. So this is all connected, and it is all leading to, hopefully, a repudiation of this denigration of the other, this danger posed by these troops in the streets, the ultimate consequence of allowing Trump to remain in power. because this is our last chance. This is not going to get better. If he retains power, it will get worse. I think it's absolutely 100% tied up to it. And it's an unconscious sort of reflection of how far we've fallen, and then a conscious realization that, oh my God, this can happen here. So hope that helped.
Thank you, Shelley. This has been profound, deeply incisive into the current problematique in the United States. Let me just close with two comments. Number one, the phenomenon of the rise of authoritarianism, while it's new to the United States, is commonplace around the world. If you look at Erdogan in Hungary, if you look at the Middle East, you look at India and Modi and Xi in China and Putin in Russia and Bolsonaro in Brazil and et cetera, worldwide, we're seeing an upsurge in authoritarianism in a way that is deeply troubling. And so I just want to underscore the obvious point that even though we concentrated on the United States today, this is a global problem. The number of journalists that are killed each year, the number of assassinations of all kinds, the manipulation of the press, the curtailing of human freedoms, is just a stark reminder that we all, everywhere, need to be vigilant to protect the very precious democratic institutions that we have so laboriously built over so many centuries. And finally, we at Ubiquity trace our lineage back to Socrates. Socrates was considered wise because he said he knew nothing, that for him, living in the question was far more important than living in the answer, that he would rather engage in truth pursued than in truth possessed. So even though Shelley and I have come to you with a communication of deep concern for us personally and for Ubiquity as an institution, we do so in the spirit of truth pursued. The world is a many splendored thing. What's happening now in the United States and what we've described is only the tip of the iceberg and one or two fractals of a complexity that is almost impossible to totally understand. So we offer this perspective in the spirit that Ubiquity takes a stand on things that we consider to be important, like climate change. All the facts aren't in about climate change, but we know enough to know it's a problem. All the facts aren't in about Donald Trump, but we know enough to know he's a real threat to democracy in America and to the fate of the earth. So we've come to you, just like we came with Humanity Rising. We could have done nothing, like most people. But we decided to track the opportunity inherent in the crisis that the pandemic represents, and boom, up comes Humanity Rising. And people now all over the world are coming onto our platform, onto the Ubiverse, into our Zoom, across our live channel partners every day to talk about things that truly matter. Democracy in America truly matters, not only for Americans and everything that we have built over the last 250 years, but to the world. Imagine a world without democracy. And let us do everything we can to preserve it. Tomorrow, Humanity Rising continues, same time, same station, at 5 p.m. Central European Time. And tomorrow we're going to have the third guest appearance of Karen Buckley. Karen has been convening now 3, as of tomorrow, panels of extraordinary women to talk about how we can empower ourselves. What does leadership mean in a time of the pandemic? So we look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Think on these things. Let them weigh on your heart. And the actions that you need to take will be revealed in good time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Shelley. What a masterpiece today. Thank you, thank you. Bye, everyone. We'll see you again tomorrow, 5 p.m. CET. Bye for now.